All right, let's get things going. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Medtech Momentum series. This is intended to be a three-part series that is going to help take everybody in the audience on an evolutionary journey, and one that is so critical. It is part of the medtech technology evolution, really understanding what it takes to bring a product from idea all the way to commercial success. With that, we've attached a panel of experts today to talk about every stage from the very beginning all the way to the end. Today, we're going to be focusing mostly on that critical stage of how do you take an idea and make that idea really come to life. I'm joined today by Vas Abramov, who is the president of Occam Design, Rob Ferguson, who is partner at Acceleron Consulting, and Frank Rapullo, who is managing partner at Acceleron Consulting. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Skimmer.
All right. So here we sit in 2025, and there are a number of things that make success when it comes to a successful invention, a successful new technology. So Vas, I'm going to start off with you. Occam Design, you really help those earliest of stage of inventors and early stage companies really start to figure out how do they bring that idea to life. So giving you a quick softball here, just get things started. What is it that when a company or an inventor comes to you that just stands out and you think to yourself, hey, I think we've got something here?
Well, I think obviously the most important thing is the idea, right? If you look at the idea and based on your previous experience, you kind of right away know, is it something inventive? Is there something like that out there? Will it solve the problem that is there already? And if you innovative, because you need to have a patent on your idea. So, and that's part of it, right? But even if you have a wonderful idea, the most important thing is the execution, right? So you need to look at the team behind the idea. Do you have a person who is technologically inclined, who knows how to, make things happen with regards to mechanical, electrical, or software? Do you have some kind of a salesperson there who knows how to present, who knows how to push this idea forward, who can go and shake the trees and figure out where they can get money, for example?
So I think it's great. I want to break down your answer a little bit into parts here first. Okay. So one of the first things you said, which is kind of the dawn of all invention, which is problem solution, right? Seeing a problem, identifying and creating a solution for it, right? That's why we invent. But let me, there's a lot of problems out there that don't need answers. And then there's a lot of solutions out there that don't have a problem. Right?
True that.
So let me ask you, how do you, just breaking that first aspect down, how do you investigate and say, you know what, there's a good match here. There's actually a problem and there's a viable solution that we see, even early stage. What do you see there?
Well, as funny as it is, I do a Google search.
Okay.
I do a Google search to find out if there is product similar to what is being presented to me out there on the market. You do not know how many times I Googled the idea that was presented, and there is 5 or 6 things out there that are already on the market. So that is first thing. And then if there isn't, I try to do research on whatever the problem that they are trying to solve. If there is really a problem, if there is really a market. And I'm not a market expert, right? I'm just doing the initial kind of a probe into it just to find out, in my personal opinion, how it's going to play out at the end. But there are companies and people that specialize in this kind of thing.
So that's great. All right. So Rob Ferguson, I'm going to turn to you here. Okay. I want to stay on that question of problem and solution, right? Everybody thinks that they have solved the holy grail of problems and they have the solution, the holy grail solution to all the world's problems, et cetera. But Rob, you work with a lot of companies at doing that early stage landscape assessment and viewing what are the potential pitfalls down the line, where do you see those inventors and those early stage companies that have the most success? Like, what creates success for them?
Yeah, it really goes back to what Voss was saying a minute ago, and especially whenever you're talking about a concept to a reality of a product, the question is going to be who's your target market, where are you going to focus on, and how do you get that information? A lot of people will do exactly as he mentioned, will begin with Googling or just sending out to the market, and you may have 7 different answers. And so what we try to do is go to very reliable and viable sources that is very compelling on how the data is and is current. So in the landscape development, in what I do in the early stages is make sure that we go down to the checklist to ensure that it is not only current, but it also is touching on the points that most people don't think about. For example, bringing a product to market, knowing your competitor is good, but do you know what they're going to be releasing here in the next few months? Do you know what the government is going to do with reimbursement? So it's things like that that become critical.
So let's look at the genesis of where most medtech products evolve from, right? It usually comes from the minds of some sort of clinician, physician, nurse, surgeon, whoever it is that sees a problem at hand, and they say, okay, I can invent something, or it's some engineer that has been involved repeatedly in the solution process, right? Rob, do you think that a large part of those people are actually doing a competitive analysis and looking at the stage further down the line when they're in that place?
Do they do that? Probably not to the extent that is needed.
Okay.
And again, the data that you have to depend on is really how you're determining your business going forward. And so, for example, if the data that you're receiving out there is old, or maybe they're not asking the right questions, they're just finding it out as much as what Google is reporting to. And even I've noticed with AI is an open source that provides you all sorts of information, but the question is it accurate?
So go ahead, keep building on that.
Yeah. So what you'll find many times, they will ask from what they know is what they don't know is where the challenges and where their failures begin.
So one thing I just want to make as a point of clarification for any of the Gen Zers in the audience, Google is a tool that we at our age group use to identify. It's not TikTok. We don't really know how to use TikTok, our group. We go to Google to find answers. I just wanted to clarify that so everybody understands the analogy so we don't lose any of the audience members. You can go to TikTok too, but really Google is where we go. All right. So Vass, coming back to you for a second here. Is it cheap to bring a product to market? I mean, Occam Design, right? You help companies go from the patent process all the way to regulatory, prototyping, getting a product ready, helping them set up manufacturing and a design history file. I mean, can I just throw a couple nickels at it and be like, I can make this happen? Help me understand. Like, because Rob's telling me that not everybody's doing the research, then it must be a pretty cheap process to bring a product out. Help me understand that.
No, unfortunately, that's the problem, because it costs a lot of money to get product out in the market, medical device. I mean, you're looking at maybe 500,000 to 10, 20 million, and that is just for class 2 device. I mean, class 1 devices, you're looking for something 250 to 500, maybe $1 million. It costs a lot of money. And unfortunately, a lot of inventors, a lot of innovators that are bringing product out in the market think that getting product through FDA is pretty much the end.
Yeah.
And it's not, because you need pretty much as much, or if not more money to get it into the market, into the sales.
So you're saying that people should be thinking, even in the invention and ideation stages, going beyond just the engineering, the production, and the regulatory, but actually thinking about commercialization in that stage?
Well, they have to be thinking about everything, right? As you start developing, you have to be thinking about intellectual property, right? You have to think about IP patents. You have to think about NDAs that you are placing with all the companies that you are dealing with. You have to start thinking about regulatory right away. You have to start thinking about design right away. And manufacturing, even at this stage, you already need to start thinking about all of those items, and you are moving them all together simultaneously to help you through it, to help you to understand where you stand and mitigate the risk that you may be having at the end.
So I want to bring it to Frank here for a second. Frank, most of your professional success and experience has been in helping companies that have kind of Vass and Rob have theoretically helped get to a process of getting that real 510K process, and you're helping them get out there and get commercialization. Frank, how many of those companies that you've been presenting, I'm not talking about the companies that you've worked with, but just how many companies have you looked at on a percentage basis that you can say, okay, they spent the money, they invested the time, they got a 510K, but they did not really understand what it's going to take to make this a commercial success? And what are some of the pitfalls that they missed along the way there? What percentage?
Well, if you're looking for a percentage of failure, I mean, I know Rob has probably some statistics around that. From my personal experience working with incubators, right? Working with these little silos that receive grant money, and they start to put together a schematic, right? So they go out there, they got an idea, they want to put together a schematic, they start to get a prototype, and then they're looking for pathways, and then they want to go to the regulatory, right? Where they fail, and this is a high percentage, and I know I might sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm going to put it at that 90% failure rate because they don't understand the market. What do I mean by that? They're going to come out with a product, and they want to figure out what channels to go to. Do they understand the acute care market? Do they understand the non-acute? Is this going to go from acute all the way to home care? So once you understand that pathway, it has to coincide with who the major incumbents are or what the best practices are, align. So in other words, you can go into acute care market. You can think you have the greatest product. Maybe it's a med surg product. Maybe it's a physician preference product. But if you don't understand the price points because it has a disposable tied to capital, or you understand the reimbursement or how it fits into a DRG, it's always going to come down to cost. And if you can bolster up the front end by doing your due diligence and getting that landscape assessment, your pricing matrix in place, your voice of customer, all those things that early stage companies need, you will have something to support your IP. So if you are going to look for a strategic, you're going to have something to show them that increases your valuation. And if you're going to look to commercialize, which by the way, I highly recommend anybody building IP should always have a plan to commercialize. Don't just look for a strategic, because what's going to happen is you're going to dance with some large cap companies and they're going to tie you up, and you've never shown a path to go to market. And I can expand on that if you want, but the point is bolster up your front end to support your IP and show to anybody who's a potential buyer, or if you're going to build up your deck to raise capital, that you have things to support your pathway.
So I want to stay on that IP track for a second. I'm going to come back to Vass on the IP because, again, you help companies with that patent process. But before I do, Rob, Frank just threw out a 90% number anecdotally. Can you fact check for a second, if you would, please? What is the failure rate of medtech?
I think Frank is reading my notes because he's spot on. It's 90% of startups fail. And
over what time period?
Over the first year, over the 10 years that they're in the business. For example, 21% fail the first year. By the 5th year, 50%. By the 10th year, 70%. So it's just, staggering numbers. And a lot of it has to lend itself back to where the finger's being pointed is, did they prepare themselves for commercialization and execution? And it goes all the way back to what Vass was talking about, is not only the concept of the product, but making sure that you know what the market information is, that you understand that if the customers really need this, is it really solving a problem? Is it also taking in consideration the safety measures? So there's a whole laundry list of things that needs to take place to make a successful pathway for a medical product.
Yeah, in my experience, a lot of inventors go around and they ask their friends and family about, how good is their product? Will people be using their product? And friends and family will always be biased. They will always say yes. So now you have this big idea, you have a big head about it, and you're going out there and you're raising money. And at the end, they were just trying to make you feel good.
Mm.
Bass, are you suggesting that a surgeon that invented a critical piece of equipment that then goes on to talk to his surgeon partners, who all of his surgeon partners tell us this is the greatest device in the history of mankind? You telling me that he's been led down the wrong path?
Not necessarily. I mean, there are really true inventions that are really great, and people are honest about it. But there are sometimes when people just trying to make people feel good.
Yeah, it's confirmation bias, right? We seek what we want to hear.
Right, right.
And so there's a lot of that goes on
and that's why it's so important at the beginning of the project to get out there and hear real opinions of people that are not biased.
So Vass, I kind of want to start, hold on, because what we're doing here is we're talking a little bit about a risk reward dynamic, right? There obviously a successful med tech technology that you bring to market and achieve commercialization success can breed a lot of financial success and hopefully obviously achieve its intended pursuit of creating patient outcome success as well, right? So with that, Vass, just walk me through a running tally of, as we think about the patent process, what does it cost? Just starting right there. What is a typical cost to get a patent through?
So you probably can file a patent, just file. Basically, you go into attorney, they do in a patent search, they write your application. Depending on complexity, you can probably file for $3,500, maybe $5,000. The patent fees for filing for a small company, you're going to be around $1,000.
Okay, so that's your first expenditure.
Yeah, it's not that much.
Okay, and then but that's where you're starting at, right? Those numbers can grow because Frank, you were talking about how patents, again, kind of the tip of the spear in the very first part of this invention process, have such an impact downstream in the ability to raise money and create a successful commercialization strategy. So, Frank, have you seen companies that have expended $3,000 to $5,000 achieve equal success as those that might have to expend a little bit more?
Yes, they're going to have to spend more money in making sure they bolster up what they want to bring to market. I see a lot of inventors that come from outside the industry and they don't understand healthcare. And they get their hands on either existing previous IP that was out there that never really got off the ground, and then they try to enhance it, or they're developing something from scratch. And those are going to be all projects up front, right? They can come in short segments on projects to get things going. But there's a part of that evolution that says, when am I really going to stand this up? And what's that look like to stand that up? And that's where you're going to have to start to look for cash infusion. And there's a host of ways to approach that for early stage companies. But what we typically see is, depending on the structure of the company, there's going to be dilution of ownership, bringing in, leaders or experts or people that understand the space. But again, where I get stuck, only because I've seen it too many times, is, and Vass said it, everyone's going to tell you look pretty, right? But you need that non-bias feedback from the market. And that has to be your way of bolstering up where you're going as a company and understanding your channel partners and the pathways. Because by doing that, you put yourself in a strong position, because here's the alternative. You have good IP. You're told you look really good by your board, your advisory board, however you're structured. And then you go to market and you're constantly shifting. You're going from non-acute to acute. You're going from, maybe you're going to after ASCs or LTACs, right? Or maybe it's a home care fit. You're constantly shifting the space you need to execute, and you're raising capital. So then you run into the problem of having a high burn rate. And next thing you know, you're raising capital just to feed your burn, and yet you have no POs coming in the front door. So what you want to do is make sure you surround yourself with good data and know exactly what you're doing, because the shotgun approach does not work in healthcare.
And Frank, I think the influx of capital and importance of it, just with regards to the patents. I mean, even though the filing fees and the initial cost is not that large on the big scale of things, by the time you get the patent, you can be looking at $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. I mean, you're going to have to be answering to the reviewer constantly to get that patent. I mean, we have a patent right now that we filed 13 years ago. And we are still dealing with reviewers. We're getting back and forth with them, trying to prove that we actually have invention. And it's not easy, especially now. It's not easy to get a patent. You know, they say that everything has been invented. Well, absolutely not. But it's definitely harder to get it patented.
Mm-hmm. So you just gave a pretty broad range there. We started at 4,000 to 5,000 potentially. Now you're talking about tens of thousands, 50,000
right.
through in there. So again, in the risk reward scale, we're starting to increase that risk, right? Capital risk, time risk is starting to increase. So now let's talk about kind of regulatory. Tell us, what does it take in terms of capital and resources to get through some of that regulatory process?
Well, and
for a class 2, let's say a class 2.
Class 2. So you can, for regulatory testing, for something very, for let's say biocompatibility, for something very simple, you're going to be looking at $20,000, $30,000, maybe 40, right? But as soon as you get into something complex, something that has a drug delivery portion, anything where you have to do chemical analysis, when you're going to have to do leachable, extractable, or if you're looking into implant, especially if you're looking at a brain implant, I mean, you can be looking at 50,000 to $1 million easily. And I mean, I think that's where importance of constantly moving everything forward is important, because you need to understand your regulatory path at the beginning. You may not know exactly how much it's going to cost at the end, but at least you need to have some kind of a ballpark. Is it going to be $30,000 or is it going to be $500,000? Because you're going to have to be looking at different expenditures. Are you going to be able to pay for it yourself? Do you need to look for investors? And if you are looking for investors, you're going to be able to tell them, it's like, hey, are we working on a $500,000 project, or are we working on a $3 million project? And you need to know that from the beginning.
And when you say 50,000 to 3 million, that's just in the regulatory, getting a product. And we're saying class 2, which everybody doesn't know. We're talking about a 510K filing process, right?
Right.
So in this regard, to go, you basically said 50,000 to 3 million is the price range, right? In that range.
Well, I mean, 3 million is unlikely, but you're going to be somewhere in the middle, probably.
Okay.
$500,000 is easy. I mean, it's like nothing.
So let's just take the median mark there, about 1.5-ish. Okay. Taking you up to 50,000 before, right? So Rob, coming back to you here. Okay. The risk reward scale is getting a little kooky. Okay. We're talking about, numbers that you're talking about 7-figure numbers minimum to get to here. So before, you were talking about how people still miss the mark in terms of looking downstream and seeing market acceptability. But they've gone through this process potentially, or about to engage this process and invest all this capital to get a product viable in the eyes of the FDA, et cetera, et cetera. what are they missing here? Like, why would you just help me understand? And again, I'm the son of immigrants, right? So $1.5 million is a ton of money to me. And if somebody says, hey, put up $1.5 million and basically put it on red or black in the casino, I don't know if I like those odds very much. So tell me, Rob, why? What are people missing? Why aren't they investing more time?
Well, it's definitely looking at the market intelligence. It's really taken a deep dive into not only the viability, I mean, that's been done a lot of times whenever you come from concept, viability, and also the customer base and what's the voice of the customer. But the big point too is, so what does your market say about this? What's the opportunities? What's the trends? What seems to be something that is going to differentiate your product from anybody else's? Because in the healthcare system, first of all, it's very hard to go and sell a product, because even more so now, it's hard to get to a doctor if you have to get to a doctor or a practitioner, whoever it may be. And then also to be able to bring a product that's already under contract and have a value analysis committee to endorse it and bless it. So the information that you gather is so critical up front. And it's even used really as a feather in the cap that you've done your due diligence, that you've done a great job in determining what the sales team uses as a benefit of why that product should be in the hands of the healthcare practitioners over and above anybody else's. And so when you look at the data and you look at the technologies, you look at the opportunity, you look at what is happening at the federal level with reimbursements, and you also look at scalability. So there's, again, I'm touching on a few things when there's a whole laundry list that is absolutely the critical steps with any business plan, that they know that, but also to the investment community that you've done your due diligence and you know what you're talking about for a successful market launch or product launch.
Okay. So having a little bit of forethought. Coming in here, doing some investigation, right? It only seems to make sense that if you're going to lay out that sum of capital, that you would do some investigation as to what's, because here's the reality that I think most people lose sight of. The inventors, and Vass, you touched upon it before, they view the 510K as the end, not necessarily the means, right? And I think what I'm hearing all of you say is this whole thing, this whole evolution, the 3-part webinar series, Medtech Momentum that we're talking about, is a series of means to consistent periods of ends that may not come for a long time, right? That end is kind of elusive in some ways, right? So if you've got to go on this journey that is just a consistent series of means, okay, Frank, how do you quantify that when one of these early stage inventors is trying to come to the capital markets and saying, hey, trust me, trust this technology, right? How do you quantify that? How do you make that qualifiable and quantifiable for those people that are assessing that?
Yeah, everybody's got an idea, right? And everybody needs money. And what happens is the ideas are good and they're going down the right path. And like you said, they got their FDA approval. And there's pressure from however you raise capital. There's either pressure on yourself for your friends or family, or maybe an angel that came in. But there's pressure to go to market. And that's the thing they want to do, is they want to push that through, and they start to ignore how they're going to map out their execution. They're not building the right deliverables and scope of work, and they're not getting that market intelligence. And if they can stay more in the present and understand that they have to support their product, whether it's leading a pathway to outcomes that coincide with a cost-effective solution, but they have something that really supports what they're bringing to the market, instead of rushing out there, because it sounds really cool to say, hey, world, here's my new product, here's my new toy, right? But adoption is extremely challenging, because healthcare systems have survived forever without your product, and now you're telling them they need something. And as much as it's new technology to you, to them it's unproven technology. And the only way to prove it is to start to bring in those experts on that voice of customer platform, on that market intelligence, putting all that landscape assessment, knowing who your true competitors are. We had a company who built a wound care product, and they thought their competition was all the other wound care products. Their real competition was the fact that nurses would grab pillows and put it underneath the ankles of patients to prevent heel ulcers. Boy, are you going to get that by just running out in the market? No, you're only going to get that by getting in front of the right people and understanding the best practices. So yeah.
So, Frank, I guess help me understand. If I'm an inventor, if I'm a surgeon, and I have no experience in the medtech commercialization process, but I am at the point here where I have seen a problem, I have an idea for a solution. Are you telling me that even in that early stage, I should be thinking 10 steps down the line about adoption? Like, help me understand that. How am I supposed to think that far off?
In my opinion, yes. How you get there is to be determined. Your problem that you see in your own world, is that necessarily going to resonate across a region? Is it across the country? Do you have a solution that falls within, level 1 trauma centers, magnet hospitals? Do they fall into rural area hospitals? What type of practices? What type of procedures? We have some of the greatest institutions in the world. We have roughly around 5,700 hospitals. And they pride themselves on best practices and how they structure to get outcomes. And your experience in your own world has to align with maybe a certain entity in the marketplace. And so you have to figure that out. We kind of, I don't mean to say this as a, jokingly, but we see some of the greatest things ever. You could have the cure for cancer, and I can tell you right now, you can go to institutions and major IDNs and aggregation groups and try to get their attention. And by the time you get to value analysis, by the time you get feedback, by the time you start to match up to who the major incumbent is or how they've survived forever with your product, there's a point you need to be adopted. And how do you do that? And that starts in the early stages of knowing what you're building and how you're supporting it and where you're going. The days of building something and shelving IP, that's what happens. You get shelved. You just never get it off the ground. I've seen products that can completely eliminate open heart surgery, right? Absolutely amazing what they can do. But did they understand that? Well, there's a lot of money to be made to a hospital coming in and living off the fact that they've been, doing open heart surgeries. And I don't mean that in a negative way, that they're not willing to adopt a new practice to solve that, to get better patient outcomes, but there's certain institutions that would embrace something like that.
So I want to bring it back to Vas, and we only have a few more minutes left. So I kind of want to round this discussion out as we set up the transition to the next webinar, kind of a back to the future to be continued type of way here. So with that, Vas, I want to ask you, and you don't have to share the name of the product, the company, the inventor, et cetera, but being the fact that you're the most exposed, you're the one that has the most experience at working with and seeing those inventors come so early in the process. Can you give an example of where you just saw an inventor and you said yes, and they did actually achieve all that success because they thought ahead already? That was an easy question to ask. You should have an answer very prepared.
Yes, we have. We have many success stories. A lot of them start from the product that already has been marketed. So there is already a market that has been built, and all of those stories are based on improving the product that is being marketed. So that happens a lot. Now, if somebody's coming in, but we have stories where people coming in with ideas that are brilliant, as it was pointed out, and they really truly getting through whole process of medical device development. They get out there, they get 510K, and then they hit the wall of the hospital, and breaking that wall takes a lot of time and money, and a lot of times that's where companies kind of slow down and try to figure out a way to get into market. Now, I think what Frank was saying and what Rob was saying is that they need to start doing it at the beginning, right? By the time they get to the end, they need to have their CPT code if they need a CPT code. They need to have the sales force if they're going to have a sales force. The sales force needs to already know how to get into hospital, how to get into the purchasing groups. And that's where success is coming from. And if the company does that, yes, they're going to be successful.
So, Rob, coming back to you for a second here, you rattled off some statistics: 23% failure rate in year 1, 50% failure rate in year 5, et cetera. In your estimation, a company that properly looks, or an inventor or an early stage company that properly looks forward a little bit more, I mean, you can't take those percentages down to zero, right? They're always going to be non-zero. But what do you think you theoretically, with a sound landscape assessment, with a sound forward-looking viewpoint, what do you think the 5-year number could be reduced down to in terms of risk mitigation practice?
5-year number. I mean, again, this is coming from me, just from the market intelligence that I know we gather, and it's over time. I would say it could be reduced down to 25%, about half. And the reason for that is that it's just like going out and buying a house. You go out and buy a house, you're probably going to go and see what the market comparison is. You're going to start doing a lot of the due diligence in order to, one, find the value. The value is so critical because you're buying it and you're not getting jabbed for it, but also you're well informed. And that's kind of the analogy I use sometimes at a broad level. But when you're talking about a business, it's an investment, it's an asset. It's something that apparently you know and you feel that you have information, but is it adequate? Is it validated? Is it compelling? There's a better way to go about really going after that data and assuring yourself, but also you investors, that you're making the right choice and you've got the business plan to back it up. And that's really where I come from with that.
So we're approaching the Super Bowl. We're approaching March Madness. Some people have certain vices around this time of year, right? And when you look at that kind of dynamic here, and we look at the perspective of, we've already said, Vas, you've quoted it, we're looking at 2.5 to 3 million, okay? And Rob, you just said with proper foresight, and Frank is building off what you said, you can't eliminate risk. All you can do is mitigate it.
Yep.
Okay. So with that, why wouldn't our audience take that advice and try to find ways to maximize their success, mitigate that risk, and get to a point where that money actually produces a significant return and beyond, right? That's what we're all looking for, to impact patient care, impact healthcare, and hopefully in so doing, in concert with that, we find some commercialization success, right? So gentlemen, going to turn it to you. Just any final thoughts that you want to leave the audience with? Frank, turn it to you first.
Yeah, people get emotionally tied to the process, and you got to kind of back out of that, because what happens is you're telling everybody in the early stages that, if only I had X amount of dollars, I can have IP. If only I have X amount of dollars, I'll have FDA. And then you'll start seeing the PLs, and nobody wants to go back to mom and dad, say, I need more money to vet this product out, right? So they're always trying to find the fastest way to jump ahead. And what they should be doing is be very skillful in the beginning stages to understand what they're really bringing to market and get non-biased, objective insight. And once they have that information, it stands up their IP. It creates stronger valuation. So they go both ways now. If you're looking for strategic, fine, knock yourself out, but make sure you always have a path to commercialize. Don't just do one. That's what I would do.
That's a great point. Rob, how about you?
Yeah, whatever you do, do not take shortcuts. Shortcuts is what a lot of the failure comes from. Similar to what Voss was talking about in the investment up front, make sure you put that same investment into your business plan. And that plan has got to be well thought out, well structured, and with an execution that you can be realistic about. The data behind that is the crux. Similar to the Super Bowl, there's going to be playbooks. Some of this data is used in those playbooks for them to win. And that's the whole point behind that, is that always make sure that you're investing up front to have a perfect, well, not a perfect, but a successful execution.
I love it. Thanks, Rob. And Vass.
Well, I would say find experts, find specialists in the field of your invention, of your product. Find people that you can work with. Find people that you can share this journey with. Make sure that you trust those companies, individuals, wherever they are. But make sure that you take whatever information, whatever knowledge they give you. It's definitely going to be a journey. It's not easy. Mistakes will be made. That's why you need to work with someone who you trust and someone who knows what they are doing. Don't work with college students. They are wonderful, they are cheap, but they have never done this before. Make sure that your partner has taken a product that you are working, similar products that you are working on, through the regulatory to the market, and they are successful.
So in summary, what I'm hearing between the three of you is appreciate that it is a process, understand that it's a process, and that it's going to be a process to get through. Don't take any shortcuts in that process, okay? And understand that every shortcut can have seismic impact later, okay, if you don't appreciate that. And finally, have a guide to take you through that journey to make sure that you understand all the pitfalls, all the perils that can come there. Again, you can't make this a non-zero, you can't make this a zero risk factor, right? It's always going to be some level of risk associated with this. But from what I'm hearing from you gentlemen is creating some opportunity. If you take those 3 points in stride, you can mitigate that risk, optimize your opportunity for success, and that's what we're looking for. So with that, gentlemen, thank you very much for the time. To our audience members, thank you for joining us today. Again, this is just the first part in the Medtech Momentum series. We'll be having our second webinar on February 11th. In that series, we'll be talking a little bit more about the preparation and the movement going from pre-commercialization into a full commercialization process. Our panelists have already talked about the idea of you always have to have the end in mind. So now we're going to focus and lean in a little bit more on that process, especially as the stakes, the investment, the capital becomes even bigger. And that's where we're going to be going with this. So thank you, everybody who gave us a lending ear today. Thank you, panelists, and wish everybody much success in 2025.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.